Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Real Life. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. I've written a story. It's based in the setting of Veldmar, Wastes of Veldmar, the set that I designed myself. If you haven't seen that yet, I have a bunch of videos on the channel where I talk about the colors, the guilds, which they're not all called guilds, but anyway, there's 7 of them. The overall themes of the set, and the whole card list. It's a full expansion of 281 cards. Today we're going to do a story piece. And I've got some card art and stuff to go along with the story over here on the left. Make it a little bit more visually interesting. One more thing, when I'm writing, I don't try to rein in my use of curse words. So normally on the channel, I've always tried to keep cussing out of the channel, but when I'm writing, if it feels like it's right for the character, I just write it. So if you're listening to this and there are wee ones in the room, if you're concerned about that sort of thing, then you've had fair warning here. Chapter 1. Steel, Blood, and Crystal. 4554 Argivian Reckoning, 10 years before the present day. It was a busy morning at the bazaar in Varansar. Despite the punishing sun already beginning to bake the flagstones, a steady stream of people flowed like a river between the colorful stalls on their way to shop, steal, or beg. A short way from the town criers and broadsheets delivering bad news between lurid tabloid distractions, a young and pretty human woman, with short red hair and immaculate purple plate armor, stood near the main tack board, loaded with notices for advertisements, jobs, and lost pets. Though barely an adult, she was well stocked with weaponry, with a two-handed greatsword, an unstrung longbow, and a quiver of arrows at easy access on her back, along with a modest leather backpack and a dagger on each hip at her belt. Her intimidating weapons, colorful appearance, and lack of heraldry marked her as a mercenary, advertising for work just as plainly as a notice on the tack board. She scanned the crowd, keeping an eye out for a good mark. No, not a mark, a client, Duvala thought to herself. This is honest work. Well, honest enough. After a few minutes, she spied prospective clients coming towards the tack boards. A male half-elven wizard with a thin graying goatee and spectacles, wearing garish but well-made robes of blue, red, and green, traveling with a young male human wizard in similar but plainer robes. Duvala wasn't very familiar with Quelnai College, but she recognized the color scheme as their heraldry. The older wizard looked around like a rich tourist, while the younger wizard seemed withdrawn and shy. They might need me just to stay alive in Varansar, Duvala thought. Trailing behind them were a pair of magical constructs. One was a man-sized servant that looked more utilitarian than combat-ready, and the other was a floating cube of dark gray metal that she recognized as a magical storage device that occasionally trailed behind the wealthy elites of the city. Rich and sheltered, Duvala thought. Jackpot. Now she just had to be the first mercenary to make her pitch. Unfortunately, she saw Fulmir the Flail making his way towards them as well. What Fulmir lacked in charisma, he made up for in height and width, which were good enough selling points for most clients. She didn't want to share the contract if she didn't have to. And what if the contract was only for 1 merc? Duvala looked fancy, but her rumbling belly told a different tale. She jogged up behind Fulmir, quickly assessing her options. A fight would get neither of them hired and might land them in jail. Fulmir had no reason to listen to Duvala, and wasting time on a good lie might let someone else nab her clients. There was a loose ox harness next to a fruit vendor's cart. If the merchant hadn't seen her yet... Duvala dove down, grabbed the harness, and heaved it with all her might into Fulmir's plodding path. She managed to snag his foot, and with a moment's unsteadiness, Fulmir pitched forward, catching himself, but toppling the cart in the process, covering himself in avocados and prickly pears. Luck was with Duvala. She dodged aside without having been noticed by either Fulmir or the fruit vendor. Despite her success, she winced at resorting to her father's tricks again. Ducking between stalls, she emerged suddenly onto the thoroughfare, startling the two robed wizards. Looking for protection? You won't find a better sword arm at a better price, Duvala said, giving a charming smile from muscle memory. A little young, aren't you? The younger human man said, eyeing her critically. So he wasn't as spineless as she first thought. He wore spectacles like his companion, but he was taller, more broad-shouldered, and his dark brown curls and chocolate eyes lent him a bookish handsomeness. I could say the same of you, apprentice, Duvala snapped, before immediately rebuking herself. Don't blow this job, Duvala. You need this. Now, Telrin, let's not be too quick to judge. This young woman may be a prodigy of her craft. My name is Professor Ikran Beltier, and this young man is my student, Telrin Moxnell. The older half-elf introduced them with a bow. Duvala Telg, also known as the Violet Vanquisher and the Purple Pain, she said with a nod and a grin to both. Telrin nodded back, but she could see his eyes were asking questions about her mismatched equipment. Oh, this one is going to be trouble. It was plain enough that her sword hilt and scabbard matched the armor, but the longbow, quiver, arrows, and daggers were plain and piecemeal, built for function over flair. Her backpack and other gear were the poorest and out of place, and her empty coin purse would be suspicious next to such ostentatious armor. Telrin was taking it all in, processing it, cataloging it, formulating questions. Her first impression had been wrong. Telrin was no doormat. He was trouble. Professor Beltier replied, Daunting sobriquets, to be sure. Telrin is the reason we are here. In fact, we are making an excursion to the north to do research for Quelnai College for his graduation thesis. The college has a wonderful library, but the Department of Artifice is a bit underfunded, so gathering first-hand proof is in order. No need to worry, though. We have ample coin for a contract. Telrin rolled his eyes behind the professor, and Duvala had to suppress a smile at how bad of a negotiator Professor Beltier was. Good to hear it. Wasteland contracts are fine, but they are considered hazard pay compared to urban contracts, Duvala replied, trying to rein in her excitement. Going into the wastes of Veldmar was more dangerous, but this job was almost a dream come true. Understood. It will be about 3 weeks to get there, plus any time required for research, and then the return trip. Food and water will be supplied, medical and funerary costs will be covered, anything else is out of pocket. Based on my research, I'm prepared to offer you 5 plenari per day until the contract is complete, Professor Beltier said. Duvala did her best to maintain a neutral expression. 1 plenaris was made of gold, and it was the highest unit of currency in common trade issued by the consortium. She had heard rumors of larger denominations for major transactions. A plenaris would buy 20 loaves of bread, even with the food shortages factored in. This job might pay over 300 plenari, enough to consider buying a house or living carefree for a while, or getting arcane weapon enchantments to attract a consortium mercenary contract. She was going to bargain for higher pay, but Telrin looked like he was about to open his mouth to object. You've done your homework, Professor. Honest wages for honest work, Duvala said, shaking Professor Beltier's hand before he had more time to consider if he wanted to hire her. Well then, welcome to the expedition, Miss Telg, Professor Beltier said with a smile. Thank you, and Duvala will be fine. Nice armor, Telrin muttered. Thanks, she replied icily. Most of the supplies had already been loaded into the floating cube, which held far more than its outward size would suggest. By midday they had already left the north gate, although Duvala insisted on having lunch to bolster their fortitude. She was amazed at the spread of fresh fruits, cheeses, and nuts, and it took great restraint not to start devouring everything. She noticed Telrin's expression softened, but that only irritated her more. I don't need your judgment or your pity. Duvala was a little ashamed he was able to read her hunger so clearly. The wastes beyond the walls of Veronsar were much as she remembered them. Vast expanses of dusty gray sand between crags of weathered rock, littered with the occasional debris of past wars and the detritus of an industrial civilization. If anything, they were only harsher and hotter than her childhood memories of them. Speaking was a quick way to parch your throat, so mostly the travel was silent, broken with occasional interjections from Professor Beltier about the workings of some broken steam engine or other piece of junk they passed by. Though it was not a full day of travel, they were all glad when twilight approached. After settling into camp, Professor Beltier curled up against a rock with a book and a conjured orb of light. With the professor preoccupied and just out of earshot, Tellerin and Duvala were left to their own devices. "You don't look like a justiciar of Daxanthyr the Vigilant," Tellerin said. "I don't look like a what?" "Your armor and your sword. They are clearly those of a justiciar of Daxanthyr the Vigilant, god of guardians and justice. Of course, the Divine Exodus was over 100 years ago, so it would be very unusual for you to be a practicing member of the faith with no divine magic. Not that it's any of your business, but they were a lucky find, all right. I was looting a temple ruin, I managed to squeeze into a partly collapsed passage, and I found a body in there, just a skeleton. The rest of her gear was ruined, but these were in great condition. I'm guessing you've never looted a corpse before." "No." Tellerin's reply was simple, with no venom or haughtiness. "They have some minor enchantments, the armor probably resized to fit you, and you no doubt have noticed it is aerated to allow sweat to evaporate. Neither one is rusted, and both are more durable than steel, though they are not indestructible. A lucky find indeed." "How do you know that? Is that all part of being an artificer or wizard or whatever?" "I'm an artificer, so I could have figured out the enchantments by inspecting your equipment, but I'm also a historian. Those are my areas of expertise, along with mana dynamics." "But the professor didn't know about my armor and sword." "Professor Beltier is more specialized in artifice, but he is interested in historical artifice. That's why he's helping me with his expedition." "Okay, fine, I'll bite. What is this grand thesis we're going all this way for?" "How much do you know about the old wars? The times before the consortium?" "A bunch of petty lords and rich asshole wizards fighting over land and resources. I don't know all the details. There were several failed kingdoms and empires, yeah?" "Dozens. But what about before that?" "You mean Veldmar's creation myth? That we all arrived one day through a giant rift and found an abandoned world with ruins and machines? That basically sums up what I know, and I'm not sure I believe it." "It's not a myth." Tellerin's tone was again neutral, with no heat or condescension. "The rift from Chandalar happened a little over 1,000 years ago, roughly 3,500 Argivian reckoning. The historical writings and oral traditions that survived from that time indicate the weathering of the ruins roughly corresponds to 300 years of erosion, which would place an apocalyptic event happening on Veldmar around 3200 AR. That is the same time the Great War between the Ancients and the Tolgath abruptly ended on the plain of Olgrotha. I intend to prove this event was not only connected to the end of the Great War, but that Veldmar was in fact a base of operations for the Ancients, and that Veldmar was damaged by the Great War." "Okay, I don't know about this Ancients-Tolgath Great War thing, but if it happened so long ago, it didn't even happen to our ancestors, why do you care?" "Learning the truth of what happened to Veldmar might let us heal the damage to keep it from being destroyed. And on the pragmatic side of things, did you know most of the really ancient constructs and machines are still in working order?" "What? That stuff from over 1,000 years ago? It's got to be falling apart with rust." "Most of the machines back then were heavily enchanted with mana. It made them less efficient to produce, but it also protected them from the ravages of time. A lot of stone and makeshift power stones, mana crystals, were being employed in their construction as well, so there was less opportunity to rust. I might be impressed if you bring one of those things back to life, but you won't make it there if you don't sleep. We've still got to set a watch for the night." "Digger will stand guard," Tellerin said, indicating the humanoid servitor construct. "All the same, Duvala said. I'm going to keep watch for part of the night. The first 2 weeks of travel went mercifully uneventfully. There were still outposts and settlers and salvagers, the rude trappings of civilization. Duvala was wary of those they met, but so far they had not run afoul of marauders or thieves. At the start of the 3rd week, they put the last outpost behind them, heading into the remote wilderness. Without the distractions of civilization, the loneliness of the barren landscape crept in. In the eerie stillness of the occasional monolithic abandoned factory, firebombed power plant, or wrecked war machine. Occasionally they would see other people at a great distance. Looters or explorers or marauders, it was impossible to tell, but none of them made any effort to approach them. On the 3rd night of the 3rd week, Duvala stood hidden in the deep shadow of a great boulder, keeping her watch in the witching hours. The temptation to be lazy and just sleep was always there. Yet a combination of survival instinct and a desire to impress her employers kept rousing her to take the watch. Tonight, she had an exceptionally good hiding spot and vantage point, and her persistence paid off as she spotted movement in the darkness on top of a dune. Duvala tensed, but she calmed herself. It could be a wild animal, a malfunctioning construct, or a wanderer with no ill will, though the time of night was unusual. Straining her eyes and ears in the darkness, she saw the dark shape again, and for a moment 2 red eyes flared with a magical glow before going dark once more. Not good. The list of things it could be took a bad turn, full of monsters and unknown magic. It was keeping its distance, staying low, stalking to another vantage point. It was humanoid in shape. Duvala weighed her options. She could wake the others, but the creature would be alerted, and she might lose the opportunity to observe it. She could shoot at it with her longbow, but without more information that could be a terrible mistake, provoking something that might leave on its own. She could move closer and risk being noticed, but Duvala knew she was no rogue, and her armor was noisy, not optimized for stealth. For now, she chose to stay and observe, as she quietly strung her longbow. The figure stalked around for half an hour, and Duvala realized it was looking for something. It doesn't see me in camp. This wasn't the first time it had scouted their expedition, then. It had either seen them in passing or it had been following them, and it could not see where Duvala was tonight. Finally, casting a frustrated glance about with glowing red eyes, it rose up taller, to dash quietly over the dunes away from them. There was just enough pale moonlight to silhouette the figure as it rose up. A muscular female figure with long dark hair, spiked armor, and clawed gauntlets. Moving at that speed, and stealthily, in heavy armor, Duvala finally narrowed down her guess. A vampire. Shit. She woke up Professor Beltier and Tellerin. Guys, we've got a problem. What is it, marauders? Professor Beltier said as he sat up quickly, while Tellerin sprang to his feet. Worse. I had a chance to study her at a distance. We've got a vampire stalking us. Sometimes they have a whole clan, Tellerin said, paler than usual. I don't think this one does. She cased us for half an hour. I think she couldn't figure out where I was tonight, which means she's been following us for at least a day or two. If she had a whole clan, they would have just overpowered us. She's a lone wolf. We could try to reason with her, Professor Beltier suggested. I've heard of vampires being hired as mercenaries by the consortium, but you need to keep them supplied with blood. If she wanted to talk, she's had time to approach us, Duvala said. We could track her to her lair, kill her in daylight, Tellerin said. A bold suggestion. This is her hunting ground, and none of us are skilled trackers. That scenario plays out in her favor with an ambush. She hasn't attacked us yet, which means she doesn't think she can kill all of us at once. We could backtrack for more help, but that would make the journey longer and cost you more money. If we keep a lookout, never go anywhere alone, and push forward, we'll get outside of her hunting grounds and find a spot to face her on our terms. She might even decide we're too much trouble, but don't hold your breath. You're suggesting we just let her keep stalking us for now, Tellerin said, surprised. We've got to change the terms of the engagement. Right now our only advantage is numbers, and we could squander that if we walk into a trap. I agree with you, Telerin said, with a look of approval. I concur. We will stay the course with extra precautions, Professor Beltier said. I'll take the last watch tonight, along with Digger, of course, Telerin said. Come on, I'll show you my hiding spot, Duvala said. When they arrived a short distance from the professor, Telerin turned to Duvala. There's something I don't understand about you. Why be a mercenary? T stands for trouble and Telerin. Why not be? Duvala deflected. Lots of reasons. Mortality rate, permanent disabilities, risk of illegal activity, unstable income, constantly away from home. I could go on. I've got to make a living somehow. You could have sold that armor and sword, made quite a few plenari, and set yourself up for a lot of different professions. Okay, look, I don't expect someone who could afford Quellenite College to understand, but we're not all born into privilege, and we're not all gifted with magic. I tried it, and I could tell the best I would ever be at spellcasting is lousy. I could have been an artificer, but I just didn't enjoy it, no offense. None taken. So I chose a path where I could still become wealthy, gain respect, and one day advance in the consortium to fix what's wrong with it and Veldmar. I'm also good at fighting, and I enjoy it. You look people in the eye, and you either scare them off, or you plunge a sword through their chest. Either way, it's honest. It's authentic work. Telerin had a quizzical look. It can be. You seem more nuanced than that, Duvala. It seems to me you possess guile and subtlety and cunning that runs deeper than hack and slash work. A smile sprang to her lips before she could suppress it, and a pleasant warmth rose within her, even as she immediately felt conflicted. I'm just your average girl in justiciar armor, she said. Oh great, am I flirting now? He's going to have me talking about Dad next. Get it together. It was Telerin's turn to smile. Okay, so you're ambitious, and you like it. That'll do for now. Glad that's cleared up. Good night, Telerin. Don't let the vampires bite. I'll try my best. The journey was tense after that. They moved with more urgency during the day, and paranoia filled the night. The vampire still followed them, catching up to them every night and prowling in the darkness, but she kept her distance. By the time the Valley of Ruins came into view, they had not seen anyone else traveling the wastes for the past 3 days. The ruins were impressive. Monoliths and towers of weathered stone with faded inscriptions of strange flowing and curling pictographs, and inset with glowing crystals. A giant mine entrance hundreds of feet across interrupted the cityscape, gaping like a dark maw beckoning prey within. Beautiful, Telerin murmured as he took in the view. I was thinking eerie or foreboding, but there is a beauty to it, Duvala said. With any luck, we'll find something to help us battle the vampire. A good ambush point, or perhaps a functioning construct, Professor Beltier said. They plunged into the ruins, scanning carved walls of flowing pictographic script that followed long, curving lines, and exploring towers as quickly as they could. Since Duvala could not read the Veldian script, she focused on physical exploration. It became increasingly clear that the ruins had little of value, with no signs of a construct or machinery to aid them. She catalogued various choke points and ambush positions as she went, but she was worried they weren't all going to make it out of this alive, and it was her job to be one of the corpses. It was early evening when Telerin shouted, "Over here!" Duvala and Professor Beltier joined him at a monolith, standing in a series of other monoliths. It's a record of wars and battles, monuments to their planar conquests. It's told in Veldian script from the perspective of the ancients, and this final monolith details the Great War with the Tolgath. It names Veldmar as the foundry of the ancients, where most of their construct production took place. The entries abruptly stopped during 3200 AR. This is it. This proves my thesis. Telerin was more animated than Duvala had ever seen him, practically leaping from place to place as he read the inscriptions. Wonderful! Telrin, we need to make charcoal rubbings and transcribe as much as we can, Professor Beltier said enthusiastically. Guys, it's going to be night soon, and we still haven't figured out how to deal with our vampire problem, Duvala said. Right. I'll just make some quick charcoal rubbings of the most critical parts, in case we can't come back, Telrin said, working with a feverish intensity. Duvala sighed in frustration. Ivory Tower academics. They would fall off a cliff for a glimpse of a rare bird, or in this case get eaten by a vampire because they were too busy doodling. To his credit, Telrin did work quickly, packing away his work in the floating cube just as the sun had set. Okay, I was thinking we could set up an ambush from those eastern towers, Duvala began, when a wailing shriek interrupted her from the direction of the ruins. Fuck, what now? From out of one of the towers, a spectral form emerged, no longer recognizable as a person. With distorted skeletal features and nightmarish misshapen claws to go with its keening wail, the spirit was monstrous, more of a banshee or a wraith than a ghost. Two more spirits emerged from other buildings, one dragging burning chains behind it as it screamed in agony, another stepping out of a doorway to unfold into a faceless black shadow 12 feet in height, but narrow, as if it had been stretched like putty. My research said nothing about this, Telrin cried. Professor Beltier stood transfixed in horror. Get to the mines, Duvala commanded, somehow managing to make herself heard over the shrieking spirits and keeping the panic out of her voice. The professor regained his composure, and they fled across the open ground, out of the cursed city of monoliths and glowing crystals, sprinting for the cavernous maw of inky blackness as the twilight faded suddenly to night. A black storm cloud was violently blotting out the sunset with no warning, a swirling vortex with flashing pulses of blue lightning. A warp storm! Good call on the mines, Telrin shouted. Thanks, Duval yelled back, but there were scores of other colorful words she felt like screaming into the wind as they plunged into darkness. Warp storms were infused with unstable magic. They could teleport you hundreds of miles or make you lose your memory. As they crossed the threshold, there was an immediate calm as the sounds of wailing wind and rain became distant and muffled. The spirits were not giving chase. Professor Beltier summoned his orb of magical light, illuminating a cavernous space supported by stone arches covered in spell sigils. If it had ever been a mine, it was something else now. They found a variety of tools, some for shaping stone, but others for gem cutting or metalwork, clockwork tinkering. What is this place? Duvala asked, looking at Telrin. It appears to be a workshop or factory of some kind. I would almost say for golem construction, but the equipment is too big for that. Perhaps we'll find constructs that aided the assembly process. We could overrun the vampire, Professor Beltier said, his voice still quivering. Let's go. We still need a place to make our stand, Duvala said. Minecart tracks ran along the left and right sides of the cavern, hugging the walls. But nothing came through the vast middle space. Duvala noticed there were no signs of animal life. A hole this large should have insects, lizards, birds, and the dens of larger creatures. But there was nothing except the tools and machinery of the ancients, whoever they were. Not even corpses. Wait a minute, something is wrong here. Where are the bodies? Duvala said. That's a big part of the mystery. We're not sure if they vanished or traveled to another plane or what might have happened. There's no record of seeing them as undead, such as skeletons, nor as ghosts either, which is why I'm perplexed at what happened in the ruins, Telrin said, his brows knit in consternation. I guess I feel a little better that we're not walking into a skeleton army. Perhaps the warp storm drew the spirits out, Professor Beltier suggested. Warp storms tend to be more prominent near ley lines, so Telrin stopped abruptly, as a colossal maw of sharp teeth came into view ahead of them. The initial shock faded to caution, as the giant mouth did not move, remaining open to reveal massive rows of metal-reinforced stone teeth and an interior filled with glowing crystals. It's a war machine of the ancients. Is it operational? There must be some schematics or a control rod nearby, Professor Beltier said, moving forward and searching the area. Duvala and Tellerin joined the search, and soon they ran across a foreman's stone desk, covered in dust but with schematics on display. Replica of scaled worm to join the final Trove assault on the citadel of the Tolgath. Tellerin read from the beautiful flowing pictographs along curving lines. They looked more like decorative flourishes than language. Worms were massive living creatures, like giant serpents that burrowed through the ground. In some ways they resembled dragons more than snakes, but they lacked most of a dragon's qualities. No fire breathing, no wings, and worms had animalistic intelligence. This worm construct was impossibly enormous. Its mouth was easily over 100 feet across and possibly 3 times that amount, disappearing up into the darkness. Trove. What could that mean? Professor Beltier muttered. The work that was being done on the worm was maintenance, not construction. It should be operational. This indicates that a control rod was used. We just have to find it, Tellerin said. We're out of time, Duvala said, looking back towards the entrance. A pair of red eyes glowed in the darkness, at first making a disembodied approach, until the rest of the female vampire came into view. She wore black, spiked plate mail, decorated with red gemstones, a crimson cloak framing her. The only visible weapons were her clawed gauntlets and smiling fangs. She had long hair, so dark it was nearly black, and her gently pointed ears meant she had been a half-elf in life. Her skin was the grayish pallor of death, yet she was beautiful and terrifying. Whoever said you shouldn't play with your food was dreadfully boring, she said, her rich, throaty voice taking a sultry and mocking tone. I don't think we've been introduced properly, Duvala said, unsheathing the purple-hilted greatsword that matched her armor. She waved a hand behind her at the professor and Tellerin, trying to signal, "Keep looking, I'll distract her." Tellerin started rummaging through the foreman's desk, and the professor joined him. You're wasting your time. That thing is older than I am, and probably as clumsy as a toddler if you did get it working. Anyway, my name is Zachova. What is your name, little appetizer? I am Duvala Telg, also known as the Violet Vanquisher and the Purple Pain, Duvala projected with false confidence. She felt ridiculous and vulnerable before this immortal being, but she was willing to make a fool of herself to give them a chance. Father's trickery at work. Zachova laughed, then said, Well, you're thematic at least. If you do not resist, your last moments will be pleasant, and I will allow one of you to live. Fight me, and I will paint the walls with your entrails while you still draw breath. Fear was an important tactic in battle, Duvala knew. She tried her best to take slow breaths to calm her nerves. Her charlatan father preferred lies and fast-talking to fool others, but intimidation was another way to manipulate foes both in war and in fights. It was why mercenaries used large and exotic weaponry, gave themselves strange appearances, or even took up habits like collecting teeth from fallen foes. And they especially sought to cultivate deadly reputations and nicknames. With a fearsome enough reputation, you might never have to draw blood. Zachova might not be lying, but it was still a bluff to be called. Duvala defiantly set her feet and slid her sword back, its point near the ground, in the stance known as tail guard. It was a deceptive stance that left the body exposed but readied the sword for a massive upward slash or parry. Duvala always felt the body language of tail guard said, Come and get some. Zachova approached, both measured caution. However powerful Zachova was, she was not sure about fighting 3 people at once. Or 4. Digger! Kill the vampire! Tellerin shouted, loud enough that Zachova flinched before whirling to parry the multi-tool shovel the construct Digger carried, sparks shooting off her clawed gauntlets. Right now the shovel had switched into a makeshift polearm, a bladed halberd of sorts, and the construct's relentless assault came suddenly enough that Zachova was on the defensive for just a moment. That moment was long enough for Duvala to close the gap and flank behind Zachova, forcing her to split her attention and stay on defense a little longer. Duvala's greatsword and Digger's shovel had longer reach than Zachova's claws, but the vampire was faster and stronger than any mortal combatant. Already Zachova had slashed open a panel on the side of Digger's body and grazed Duvala's shin. Had it not been for her armor, she might have lost the leg. Digger landed a square hit on Zachova's back, knocking her forward into Duvala's thrust that pierced in at the armpit, scoring a serious wound. If Zachova had been a human, the fight would have ended there. But her vampiric blood was already closing the wound. Zachova countered back with an upward rake of her claws, catching Duvala's right forearm for another set of shallow cuts the armor mostly absorbed. They were evenly matched with Digger in the mix, even to the point where this could be a fight to the death for all three combatants. That's for someone more noble and stupid. Duvala risked a glance at Telrin, and she saw him holding a strange metal rod embedded with glowing crystals. He caught her eye and gave her a thumbs up, gesturing at the massive worm construct. Duvala began retreating towards the worm, but keeping her guard up, never turning her back on Zachova. Zachova took the opening to brutally rake Digger with both claws, slashing away gears and inner workings from the torso. Digger collapsed, making one last weak thrust at her legs with the shovel halberd, which Zachova leaped over to advance on Duvala. The worm's mouth was too big for Duvala to get out of the way if Telrin made it lunge, and if she fought along the edge of its mouth to jump clear, Zachova could probably jump clear of it as well. She was going to have to trick Zachova into moving too close, but it would be hard to stay alive long enough. Duvala went into a full defensive stance, parrying the vampire's claws and sliding glancing hits off her armor as she brought their fight towards the bottom teeth of the worm. Duvala took another slash to her thigh, the deepest she had suffered yet, and the sight of her blood drove Zachova into a frenzy. Her slashes were coming faster now, caution thrown to the wind, and Duvala soon had another slash on her shoulder and a gash on the side of her abdomen. Pain was making her lightheaded, and she fought to stay focused. Bong! Suddenly, a floating metal cube struck Zachova in the side of the head, rattling her enough that Duvala took the opportunity to pommel strike her jaw with a satisfying crack. Professor Beltier had his artificer tools and gadgets, joining the fight, while Telrin managed the worm's control rod. Duvala drove Zachova back towards the worm, and the professor followed her lead, lobbing acid vials and pestering Zachova with tiny flying constructs. As Zachova backed up to the line of colossal teeth, realization flared, and she laughed. Did you really think you could get this broken relic to bite me? Should I stand still while you construct a bomb around me, too? An acid vial shattered across her breastplate, and she screamed in fury as it sizzled across her undead flesh. By all means, keep talking, Professor Beltier said, readying another vial. Roaring with berserk blood fury, Zachova sprinted past Duvala towards the professor. Duvala took the opportunity to slice into the side of her head, a blow that would have killed a human soldier, and this time even her vampiric nature didn't immediately stem the bleeding. Zachova staggered from the hit, but still rushed forward and plunged both of her claws deep into Professor Beltier's torso, lifting him off the ground and flinging him back 20 feet, where he collapsed in a heap. You are dead and your life meant nothing, Zachova snarled as she charged towards Duvala, her own blood flowing down across half her face, Duvala and Professor Beltier's blood dripping from her claws. Is she right? No. I refuse. I refuse to let my life be a waste. I won't die in this hole with no one to remember me. Telrin had a major historical find, and Duvala would live on as part of that famous discovery. He would recount 1,000 times how the young sellsword he hired gave everything she had to kill a vampire that was the superior combatant in every way but one. Duvala always found the sly way to win. Duvala backpedaled as Zachova charged her, both claws spread, ready to slash in and kill. Duvala dropped her sword to the ground, a look of pleading terror on her face as Zachova gained on her. As Zachova closed in, and Duvala was about to stumble straight into the worm's mouth, she tripped and fell to the ground. Zachova sprang upon her, her long claws stabbing in along the crease between her breastplate and backplate, striking vital organs. But Duvala kept the momentum of her fall and Zachova's jump to tumble backwards and slingshot Zachova with all of her might using her legs. Zachova's claws had not sunk deep enough to keep her from being flung past Duvala and straight into the mouth of the worm. Zachova twisted and clawed with all her supernatural speed, desperately trying to regain her footing and crawl back out of the worm's mouth. The jaws were closing, much faster than she had ever imagined possible for such an enormous and ancient construct. The ground had dropped away as the lower jaw raced upwards, and Zachova fought against the added force pressing down on her as she triumphantly pulled her upper torso free. Then with a sudden and incredible pain, the worm's teeth snapped shut on her, and Zachova's upper torso, freed from the rest of her, fell 100 feet down from the worm's raised mouth, to land with a sickening smack on the stone floor below. Dust filled the air, and the earth still rumbled slightly from the movement of the worm as Telrin raced over to Duvala. Blood was pooling from her torso wounds, and she was choking. Telrin scooped her up in his arms with a burst of adrenaline and carried her towards where Professor Beltier had fallen. Stronger than you look, Trouble, Duvala thought deliriously, before losing consciousness. Telrin laid her down gently, then quickly checked Professor Beltier. Clearly dead, the abdomen wound and blood loss left no doubt. Telrin's stomach lurched, but he had no time to be queasy. Quickly, he unlocked the professor's floating cube and took out Beltier's potion-making supplies. Grabbing a vial meant for field samples with a tiny plunger to draw fluid, he raced over to Zachova's corpse, what was left of it. He took the vial and his dagger, made an incision at the neck, then plunged the vial in and drew out the vampire's blood. Now I've looted a corpse, Telrin said aloud, trying to calm himself from his gruesome work. He had no problem getting elbow-deep in machine grease, but humanoid creatures were a new, and so far disgusting, experience to repair. Sample in hand, Telrin ran back to the potion supplies. Machines were his specialty, but he had studied basic alchemy and potion craft. What he was attempting was risky, as he could not be sure about all the particulars of vampire blood. He was pretty sure Duvala would not become a vampire, but he could not be certain. The alternative, letting her die, did not feel like an option. She had stopped choking, no longer trying to breathe. Shaking with adrenaline and desperate speed, Telrin mixed in a stabilizing reagent and a concoction of healing herbs, then activated it with his own mana. The potion glowed crimson, a bastard prototype of the outrageously expensive healing potions the college did not give them enough budget for. Tilting Duvala's head and neck up, he force-fed the potion to her. For a moment he was afraid she was too far gone, as the potion spilled from her mouth. Suddenly, Duvala's eyes shot open, glowing red. Her hands clasped around the bottle, and she greedily devoured it. Blood stopped flowing out of her. Invisible wounds began knitting shut. Duvala? Telrin asked, a tremor in his voice, as he slid back a few inches. Her crimson gaze fell upon him, hungry, predatory. He scooted back, but she lunged forward and pinned him to the ground. He screamed as she leaned in and bit his neck. It definitely hurt, but it wasn't sharp. Duvala leaned back, touching her normal human incisors curiously, and the red glow faded from her eyes. Telrin scrambled up, eyeing her cautiously as he coughed and rubbed the blunt tooth marks on his neck that were going to bruise. "Did I just bite you?" Duvala asked, disheveled and drenched in blood. "Oh, thank the absent gods. Just a side effect, I think. I made a healing potion with vampire blood." "Oh shit, well, it worked, right? Thank you. So that bitch Zachova is dead. How's the professor?" "Dead as well," Telrin said, motioning to his body. "Damn. Sorry, Telrin. Professor Ikrin Beltier did all right by me. He had an insatiable curiosity, and he loved to teach. Professor Beltier will be missed." Telrin's voice caught, and he stopped. taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly. Duvala let a comfortable silence settle for a long beat before she spoke again. Look, it's up to you now, but I feel like this expedition has run its course. You're still technically my employer, and I'll honor the contract. But you got what you came for. Plus this giant worm if you want it. Tellerin gave a wan smile. The worm only works with a control rod. I think I'll take that for now and leave the worm here. It would just destroy and kill a lot of stuff by its size alone if I try to move it somewhere. Stuff? Wow, you must be exhausted to be speaking like regular folk. So does that mean we're done here? Bury the dead, pack it up and go? Yes, we'll leave in the morning. Good idea. We wouldn't want to get in any more trouble, Duvala said with a wink. Tellerin quirked an eyebrow. And that's it for chapter 1. Hope you all enjoyed this. If people like it, I might keep going. Even if people don't like it, I might keep going. Anyway, check out all the other stuff I've put out for Wastes of Veldmar if you haven't seen it yet. And let me know in the comments if you like this sort of thing, or you'd like me to get back to making standard decks, you know. And as always, like and subscribe, check out my other videos, and until next time, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.